Preachers are often encouraged when studying for a sermon to look for the good news in the passage, to make sure that by the time you work your way through the passage and get to the end, you have come to the good news, and you can share with the people, here is the good news for today. So where on earth is the good news for today? We have been working our way through Luke, and this is at least the fourth Sunday in a row that the lesson from Luke and the work and the actions of Jesus have been those of someone who's going to upset the status quo and is saying that if you are going to be in the kingdom, if we are going to bring about the kingdom, that's what it's going to look like. So where is the good news this morning? It sounds like once again we've got bad news. We've got a lot of people traveling along with Jesus this morning. It was a good show. He was healing people, feeding people, forgiving people, all those things that I'm always reciting. Good show. Let's follow along with him. But Luke this morning is putting the screws to us about what it means actually to be not a follower, but to be a disciple. Following is good, but he's talking about discipleship, and that is something that looks different, and it may not look just like good news from the get-go. Once again, we are faced with choices to make about the family. I was just here a couple of weeks ago talking about this very thing. You remember then in Luke when Jesus said, father will be set against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, daughter-in-law, mother-in-law. And we are so taken aback to hear that, because then as now, family is our bedrock for many, if not most of us. And certainly for Greco-Roman culture, Jewish culture then, bedrock, foundation. And what I said to you several weeks ago was that Jesus is saying the status quo must be completely upended. And that's what he is getting on about when he's talking about the family and family relationships. So once again, we hear, unless you hate these members of your family, you cannot be a disciple. This is not good news to us. So while we get ourselves focused on the word hate, and all of the commentaries spend a lot of time dealing with this or trying to ignore it and talking about why they're ignoring it or why there's an easier word, suffice it to say, hate does not mean what we think about as hate, but he's saying that there is a choice to be made here, that choices are going to be required. I don't know who among you remember the sanctuary movement in the 80s. That's when there were terrible wars going on in Nicaragua and El Salvador and Guatemala. And there were many, then as now, many refugees coming north to get away from death squads. There was this thing called the sanctuary movement, and these were churches that said, we will be sanctuary if you are fleeing. So come here, be safe, we'll keep you safe, we'll house you, we'll feed you. In particular, there was a Presbyterian church in Tucson that was at the forefront of this movement. There was a woman there in Tucson who was captivated by this. She caught on to the stories, and she felt that it was so important to be doing the work that they were doing, and it was Jesus' work to be doing. And she got very excited about it and went to the local leader and said, I want to get on board. I want to be a part of this movement. The man said to her, "Okay, great. Are you willing to let the FBI tap your phone? Are you willing to have your neighbors look askance at you or shun you? Are you willing to be arrested? Are you willing to be in a very public trial? Are you willing to go to jail? If you can answer yes to all these things, then we welcome you." She went away and thought twice. Hard choices he is asking us. Count the cost. Give away all that you have. And we ask ourselves this morning, is it worth it? Francis of Assisi thought it was worth it. Francis of Assisi was willing to give up his troubadour sort of life, his medieval middle class merchant life, give all that up in the 12th century, 13th century, give it all up and follow Jesus in a very particular sort of way, in a very fundamental, literal way, so much so that he took off all of his clothes in front of the cathedral, handed them back to his father, and said, "Here is my bishop, he is my father. Here is God, he is my father." Gave it all up for him. Lady Poverty, as he called her, was well worth it. Mother Teresa, now a saint, she decided it was worth it to leave a normal, regular sort of order of nuns and the relative security that gave her at that time, to go into the streets of Calcutta, to love and minister to the loveless and those that most of us don't want to get anywhere near. It was worth the cost to her. She chose a very particular discipleship. Now, we also hear in this reading, once we get past the hate your mother, father, etc., because we hone in on that, but once we get past that, we hear that there is some counting and some building going on in this passage. And we have to ask ourselves here this morning, do we have the labor pool? Do we have the facility and the capital, the labor here at 1400 Riverside Drive to build the kingdom beyond 1400 Riverside Drive? This is something it behooves us to think about right now as we are at the beginning of the program year. Do we have the labor and the capital to do all that we want to do in Coral Springs and beyond? Do we have the patience, the fortitude, the stick-to-itiveness to continue on, to do those things, to be disciples beyond being followers? Francis was willing to build. Francis, as you've heard me say, was in that little tumble-down church of San Damiano, and he heard Christ from the cross speak to him, "Francis, repair my church, for you see it is falling down around you." And Francis, being literal-minded, took it literally and started moving the stones and rebuilding the church. And this is before he had given up everything, so he was selling his father's fabric and tapestries in order to do this. Ergo, his father was not happy with him. But he was selling all of that to repair this one church. And of course, what did he do but repair, rebuild the whole of the medieval European church? And it grew, and more men followed him, and More women followed Clare to become poor Clares. Lay people were Franciscans. He heard, he built. The European church was upended and changed and renewed. Teresa of Calcutta, same thing, starting out, one man, one street in Calcutta, one dying man. And now there are houses of her sisters all over the world. There's an order of priests affiliated with her order, building and growing deep discipleship. There are costs to be counted, building to be done on the outside, and we see that. And my question this morning is, how are we building on the inside, in our interior, our spiritual lives? Give it all away, he said. Unless you give it all away. I'm wondering, what must we give away? What must we give away, get rid of, toss out in order to be disciples? Our beliefs about who's right and who's wrong, who is poor, who's deserving poor, who's undeserving poor. Our understanding about what church can be, is that something we just need to throw out and empty out our interiors? Get rid of it, said Jesus, unless you give it all away. And lo and behold, once we have emptied everything there, what do you suppose that then the Holy Spirit is going to build there? What will the master potter create inside each one of us?